Pressure for ceasefire mounts. Expert describes scale of suffering. Death in Gaza. Chicago, CBS. In a third visit to Israel, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Bliken met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Friday, asking for a humanitarian pause to the ongoing war in Gaza. President Biden echoed Blinken's request, saying that a short pause in military operations is needed to bring in more aid. But Netanyahu rejected any calls for a temporary ceasefire until more than 240 hostages are released. U.S. Senator Dick Durbin, D. Illinois, was the first senator to call for a ceasefire and the release of hostages. The United Nations General Assembly adopted a non-binding resolution for an immediate and sustained humanitarian truce on October 26. More than 120 countries called for a ceasefire. The United States and Israel were among the countries who didn't vote in favor of the resolution. It has been 28 days since Israel declared war after Hamas launched a surprise attack on October 7. Israel said at least 1,400 people, mostly civilians, were killed in a coordinated and multi-front attack by Hamas. Since then, Israel has bombed schools, homes, churches, mosques, hospitals, ambulances and refugee camps in Gaza. More than 9,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel and over 40% of homes have been damaged, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Time equals 400 ms, greater than in several interviews with media. Israeli officials said the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, killed several Hamas commanders in their bombardments. In a recent interview with CNN, an IDF spokesperson was asked why they would still drop a bomb on the Jabalia refugee camp knowing civilians were there. UN Human Rights have said the attacks on the Jabalia refugee camp could be considered a war crime, according to international humanitarian law. Obviously, October 7 was a horrific terrorist attack. But I don't think that justifies the scale again of death and destruction that is being inflicted in the Gaza Strip. Khaled Elgindi, Director of Program on Palestine and Palestinian-Israeli Affairs at the Middle East Institute, told CBS 2, Palestinian women, children and newborns are disproportionately impacted by the bombardments by Israel in Gaza, according to a new report by the World Health Organization. As of the 3rd of November, according to Ministry of Health data, 2,326 women and 3,760 children have been killed in the Gaza Strip, representing 67% of all casualties, while thousands more have been injured, the report reads. This means that 420 children are killed or injured every day, some of them only a few months old. The number of children killed in Gaza since October 7 has surpassed the annual global number of children killed in conflict zones since 2019, according to Save the Children. World Health Organization spokesperson and public health doctor told CBS 2 that many hospitals and doctors are without proper medical equipment. They're sewing up people on the floor with no anesthetic just to stop the bleeding, just to keep them alive. Drive. Margaret Harris said. Some Palestinians in Gaza have said their entire families have been killed. Earlier this week, CBS 2 interviewed a man who said more than 30 of his family members in Gaza were killed in Israeli airstrikes. Some family members are still missing. I think it's important to bear in mind that the catastrophe in human terms in Gaza is not collateral. It is not incidental. It is the deliberate policy of Israel to inflict massive suffering on the population, Elgindi said. We know this because Israel decided to cut all food, medicine, water, fuel to the entire population of 2.3 million people. Israel could flip the switch on all of these. Time equals 400 ms, greater than the Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ, said 36 journalists and media workers were confirmed dead as of November 3, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. CPJ also reports multiple assaults, threats, cyber attacks, censorship, and killings of family members. Time equals 400 ms, greater than a reporter and anchor on Palestine TV broke down into tears during a live report, grief-stricken that their veteran colleague Mohammed Abu Hattab and 10 of his family members were killed in an Israel airstrike. According to Associated Press, just an hour earlier, Hattab had delivered a live report from the exact location where he ended up being killed. Much of the devastation is being shown and seen around the world on social media. Social media is a double-edged sword. It's highly toxic, the discourse on social media, but it's also vital for getting information from people on the ground, Elgindi said. Time equals 400 Ms. Greater than Plestia Alakad is a Palestinian journalist, on the ground in Gaza, who details what life is like for civilians and journalists in Gaza on her social media. Life was never normal in Gaza, but I miss what I thought was a normal life, she wrote on Instagram. Time equals 400 Ms. Greater than the Poynter Institute for Media Studies released a guide titled, How to Avoid Misinformation About the War in Gaza, for readers and journalists alike. Buses from around the U.S. will head to Washington, D.C. for a national march, asking the U.S. to stop sending money to Israel and to end airstrikes in Gaza on Saturday. Organizers expect at least 30,000 people,